Negaraku, tanah tumpahnya darahku, rakyat hidup bersatu dan maju, rahmat bahagia Tuhan kurniakan, Raja kita selamat bertakhta, rahmat bahagia Tuhan kurniakan, Raja kita selamat bertakhta.
Jadi izinkan saya berpantun untuk mulakan majlis kita hari ini. Besar langit di tepi busut, besar tak muat di dalam peti, besar hati kami menjemput, kehadiran tuan puan kami hargai. Okay, jadi tanpa kita melengahkan masa, saya meraihkan Tuan Ahmad Farhan Fauzi, iaitu Setiausaha Politik dan Hormat Perdana Menteri turut hadir pada hari ini, dan saya yakin ramai telah bersua dengan beliau sebentar tadi, dan yang saya hormati Prof. Madya Dr. Muhammad Hanafi Ahmad Damanhuri,
Kenapa? Tergantung apa?
Pengarah Education Malaysia London, yang hadir pada hari ini. Terima kasih kerana meluangkan masa bersama kami. Majlis hari ini akan memberi fokus pada perbincangan ilmiah menerusi beberapa soalan yang telah kita terima semasa pendaftaran tempoh hari. Okey, jadi sedikit pengenalan sebenarnya kepada Puan Nurul Izzah di sini. Kita ada, saya yakin ramai sebenarnya dah kenal dengan Puan Nurul Izzah, yang kini mengetuai bersama Sekretariat Jawatan Kuasa Penasihat Menteri Kewangan (ACFIN), betul?
Ya.
Okey. Dan yang termasuk menyedia penyediaan cadangan dasar berkaitan subsidi dan perlindungan sosial, entiti milik kerajaan, hasil kerajaan dan hutang negara. Nurul Izzah juga merupakan bekas ahli parlimen di kawasan Permata Pauh. Beliau telah berkhidmat sebagai ahli Dewan Rakyat selama 3 penggal daripada tahun 2008. Dan hari ini Puan baru sahaja landed pagi tadi, dan Alhamdulillah beliau bersetuju untuk bersama kita petang ni. Terima kasih Puan kerana hadir, memenuhi jemputan UKEC, betul? Okey.
Thank you.
Jadi kita tak nak membuang masa. Hari ini sebenarnya yang kita anggarkan adalah 100 orang, tapi nampaknya lebih ramai daripada itu yang hadir. Itu yang saya nervous sikit tu.
Oh, yeah.
Okey, tanpa membuang masa, kita mulakan dengan soalan yang pertama.
Maybe you want me to give it a short introduction dulu ke?
Boleh kalau Puan nak.
Ya, boleh kalau
boleh.
Baik. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Terima kasih pengurusi majlis dan juga penemu ramah saya. Tepukan kerana beliau ni bukanlah calang-calang orang. Kali pertama saya jumpa, ketika itu saya ahli parlimen Permata Pauh daripada pembangkang, dan utusan Malaysia menerusi cik Saidin kita sudi memberi liputan. Saya ingat lagi ketika itu susah nak membawa kes tentang siasatan kemiskinan pelbagai dimensi yang kami anjurkan di Permata Pauh, dan memang it's not a very sexy subject. Jadi susah sangat untuk kita dapatkan liputan. Ketika itu tak ramailah memberikan ruang pada pembangkang, dan saya nak katakan memang beliau adalah salah seorang figur yang saya hargai kerana memberikan ruang tersebut bercakap tentang isu dasar. Encik Farhan Fauzi, tak ada Farhan Fauzi, tak dapatlah saya anjur hari ini program bersama dengan wakil kedutaan. Saya pun nervous juga pasal jarang-jarang buat program yang kedutaan ni. Kan, this is probably my first. Oh, kan, I've never been, yeah. Yes, jadi memang kiranya, wah, new experience ya. Hadirin hadirat, saudara-saudari, Dok, dan teman-teman yang sudi datang daripada dekat dan jauh. Ada teman-teman lama, friends of Pakatan Rakyat. Dulu zaman-zaman kita kan. Di sini juga rasanya. Kalau tak silap saya, di sini tempatnya juga kita buat gathering dan mungkin pertemuan. Semuanya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam Malaysia Madani. Ramai yang tanya saya apa maksud Madani. Saya kata sebenarnya semasa saya tingkatan 4 Form 4 tahun 1996, tiba-tiba ayah saya, Datuk Sri Anwar, menyebut Madani dalam Dewan Rakyat. Dan ketika itu kawan-kawan di sekolah bertanya kepada saya, apa maksud Madani? Tapi datang daripada bahasa Arab, Madana. Dan kalau siapa yang sempat membaca buku Profesor Nakib Alatas, dia memang in terms of to civilize, to humanize. So it really brings such an important meaning. How do you make sure that communities are able to be uplifted, dignified as you prove your worth as a civilization. Dan kita pun tahu Piagam Madinah for Muslims and the history of Islam. Piagam Madinah, the constitution led by our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it really provided refuge and protection to both Muslims and non-Muslims. I know it's a very heavy concept, but since he used it in 1996, he must use it again today. So that's why I'm just sharing with all of you. So I actually was invited by UKEC dan saya bekerja dengan Tan Sri Hassan Marikan. Kalau siapa yang kenal, beliau antara pimpinan teknokrat yang sangat digeruni dan dihormati dan mempunyai cabaran sendiri because he was actually asked to be removed from Petronas. I don't know if you know the history. As you know, Malaysia is built by many experiences, and of course, it was Singapore's gain. He served not only Temasek but also their electricity board. And I'm speaking English because there are perhaps non-Malaysians here as well who have come. Dan akhirnya beliau sudi berbakti, return to Malaysia and work with ACFIN, which is my committee, and we serve him on 4 key areas. But I just want to say that, so today I'm not wearing the hat of the government. Sorry to disappoint you, but Saudara Han is also here. But it's a different experience for me, right? Because dulu ahli parlimen pembangkang. So I always say a cat has 9 lives. So that's how I see my life, mashallah, a lot to learn. And I feel that in this my latest role, we really focus on policy matters, which is a nice continuation from the time of studying MPI, thanks to Sarawakian born Professor Fatimah Kari. I'll talk more about that. Sorry about the long introduction. Yes, Sarawakian born, and saya pujuk. I had to woo Professor Fatimah Kari for more than a year because I was from the opposition. I said, I promise you, it's a very important study for me, and Alhamdulillah, we managed to do and capture COVID-related or COVID-adjusted poverty line. In 2021, we waded through in Permatang Pau bottom 40 households in the middle of COVID. You must understand how challenging it was. And we had, Alhamdulillah, Tok Pa, Datuk Sri Mustafa Mohamad, who I just met 2 days ago. He's a complete workaholic. And we basically still talking about poverty eradication, but he came to launch dekat Universiti Malaya. I don't know if you know, being an opposition MP to get Universiti Malaya was very difficult then. And I remember waiting for him to launch it. It's like waiting for my first date. I wasn't sure if he was coming or not. And I because he was, the Prime Minister called him there, and there's a lot of drama behind it. But the point is, he came and is adopted partly in EPU studies. So today, I just want to end with, we're trying very hard, working with experts, economists from Bank Negara Malaysia, ada from PNB, from Khazanah, mainly to push for evidence-based policy making. As you know, we don't have much time. Malaysia kehilangan banyak tahun dan kita perlu memastikan we implement the necessary reforms in an empathetic manner. Because sometimes we forget, right? We talk about reforms, it's easy for us when we have enough money. But for those of you who work in UNHCR, you understand. But for those yang memang they have not, it makes a huge difference in terms of the life they lead. So how do you make sure as you do this, kalau energy transition disebut just transition, how do you make sure that as government with very little fiscal space ni, kan, that you manage to do this. So thank you. Terima kasih Daun Keladi. It's my first kind of speech after so long. 15 years as an active member of parliament is very, very long. I think my daughter is like, okay, Mama, 15-year contract is not so bad, so don't feel sad. Now just get on with it. Yeah. Okay, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih Puan Izzah. Even for the introduction, it is indeed fruitful. So,
sorry, kacau you. Aji nak tambah je. Thanks.
So we're going to start with our first question, which is soalan ni daripada pelajar dan ditulis bahasa Melayu.
Okey, baik.
Jadi mengenai rombakan berkaitan pencen pejabat awam baru-baru ni, tidak adakah titik tengah yang boleh memberi kebaikan kepada kedua belah pihak?
Ya, jadi soalan ini, and I'll translate it, is about pension reform. Dia bukanlah sesuatu yang unik buat Malaysia. Banyak negara termasuk Jepun, ini antara krisis utama yang kita terpaksa hadapi. And saya rasa perkara pertama yang penting kita ambil kira, sebenarnya banyak benar parti politik di Malaysia yang telah menikmati atau berpengalaman jadi kerajaan. So once you're in government, you will have a wealth of information yang memang sangat berlainan daripada kaca mata kita semasa pembangkang. You will know the state of the financial coffers, KWAP, KWSP, the different various bebanan kepada pembayaran yang melibatkan pencen. And that's why for me, when you talk about titik tengah, sebenarnya saya rasa semua pihak, sama ada mungkin mereka yang bekerja di sektor swasta, they will see it, you got to do this lah. We need reforms, right, to manage the finances sustainably. But if you speak to the civil servants, you must also understand, kebanyakan daripada mereka bekerja dalam suasana di mana terma saya menuntut, saya yang mengikut perintah. Right? Apa maksudnya? Maksudnya kita kena conform. Jadi kurang ruang untuk innovative atau creative thinking. Dan kalau cakap lebih-lebih, sudah tentulah bos kita yang grade lebih tinggi, ada yang suka, ada yang rasa, saya raikan idea anda yang bernas. Saya suka bila staf saya berani bersuara membangkitkan idea-idea yang hebat. Tapi bukan semua bos macam tu. Kan? Dalam keadaan sebegitu, memang ada cabaran and they feel it's better for me to do business as usual. I have to clock in at 8 in the morning, I have to work very hard, dah lah kerja bertimbun, right? Tapi bila kita ada peluang contohnya untuk melanjutkan pengajian, ini antara perbualan saya kerana kita akan buat stakeholder engagement. The first team we met was from JPA. Siapa yang kenal JPA kat sini? You guys maybe know better than me, kan? Tak nak angkat tangan. But I feel that this is the challenge, right? Because it is not easy kalau mereka sempat menimba pengalaman di luar negara, buat PhD di bidang ekonomi contohnya. Tidak ada pilihan kalau mereka ditempatkan di kementerian lain yang bukan merupakan bidang utama mereka. So I mentioned about those from the civil service who managed to get additional PhD program. They underwent it for many years and they come back and they don't have the power to kind of dictate or decide on their educational or career mobility. So that in essence, pushes their yearning for reforms. So how do we make sure we address the need for reform by also taking into account their own pathways, right? Because they're saying there's many incentives that can be introduced for us to have a more safeguarded, a more sustainable future as we go forward in our career. So this is why I think it's a great opportunity. Every party or coalition that has been in government knows this has to happen. It's just that, of course, I think communication is something that the government can improve on. I think, like it or not, I think, Zahir, you know better in terms of media bias, right? For example, back in my day, we look at media bias as completely a negative thing. Remember Rupert Murdoch? And then you followed the court cases. But now, because of the advent of social media, dia jadi macam satu situasi yang tidak serata. Jadi, media arus perdana, media akhbar yang kita baca, berlumba-lumba untuk survival mereka sendiri. So, even the government is struggling if you don't go or procure and proceed with media buys, which can cost hundreds of millions of ringgit. So, in a situation where you have limited fiscal space, what is the choice you make? And that is the challenge of government, which I think really is if everyone, kalau semua orang tahu ya, cabaran memegang dan memikul amanah, taklah orang sibuk sangat kerja kerajaan kan. Pasal dah sampai situ, kita kena selesaikan masalah. Jadi kami dalam kumpulan yang merancang dan melihat option-option yang ada, sebenarnya banyak cadangan kami lebih mendengar dan memberi ruang kepada pihak dalaman JPA. Bukan semua. Sudah tentu dalamnya ada pelbagai pendapat. Tapi yang saya fikir reformasi ini, contohnya bagaimana boleh membantu kaki tangan kerajaan sendiri mendapatkan ruangan yang lebih fleksibel. I mean, can you imagine you do a PhD, for example, in animal science? For example, I'm not referring to anyone here. And then suddenly they send you to Ministry of Tourism. How would you feel? Would you be able to work in a manner that would make you feel satisfied? Or journalism, and then they send you to Ministry of Agriculture. Right? I mean, but that is the life of someone in the PTD, and I think that's why empathy goes a long way. So when we talk about reform, actually people are pursuing the same mission. But how do we make sure it's collectively representing to place not just them, but also to push politicians, because people feel that ada dua undang-undang yang berkuat kuasa dan selalunya ahli politik dikecualikan. Jadi pada saya, bab inilah yang kita kena drive home, have to work harder, di mana mereka lah yang pertama diutamakan dalam melakukan sebarang reformasi.
Wow, okay. The first question dah already like penuh emosi dah. Very satisfying actually. Jadi disebabkan dengan apa yang Puan sebut tu, soalan saya nak jump ke soalan nombor 3 sebenarnya.
Okay.
Sebab di sini soalannya mengenai penghijrahan cendekiawan, which is brain drain, yang dah melemahkan keupayaan daya saing negara kita. Jadi adakah kerajaan ada sebarang inisiatif untuk memastikan bakat negara kita kekal tidak terabai keluar negara dan kekal dalam negara?
Jadi saya antara yang pengkritik utama semasa Talent Corp ditubuhkan. I remember we were asking very tough questions. It's funny, the then Talent Corp guy is now the KSP, Datuk Johan American. Fun fact. No, he was educated in Cambridge. Actually, I think he's one of the hybrid civil servants. But I remember, because you want to make sure kan kita bawa balik rakyat Malaysia yang memang dah belajar tinggi ni kan, hebat-hebat, pandai semua. Tapi if there's no jobs that is really helping you fulfill your feeling of satisfaction. Sometimes, of course, money is important, but I think more than money is about filling that gap, right? Even for me, like when we did MPI, I remember I came to Oxford for International Leaders Program. That was in 2011. I can't remember the actual year, and 2011. And I remember like, okay, I have to do this because I feel that when you talk about poverty, you have to modernize, right? Making it more progressive so that it captures the different types of deprivation of a household. Takkan kita nak buat benda lain, kita modernkan. Tapi kalau poverty, kita kekalkan pada tahap yang RM5 US, contohnya lah. That was my thinking. So of course, we set out to fulfill that agenda. But it's funny lah, because when I joined politics back in 1999, the party came to be in 1999, and 1998 was the movement. I never factored a day where Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim would be Prime Minister. So, alamak, kan? So how do I place myself, right? Which is best, so that I can add value but not be detrimental to the government and so on and so forth. It is a really complex problem, right? Sometimes you try your best in life, but Allah knows what happens. So back to the issue, for me, if you have a huge number outflux of workers, it's not necessarily a bad thing, for sure. But when it represents a huge number of your talent pool, then it becomes a huge problem. And that's why I want to bring back kenapa pentingnya kita rujuk dan kita selesaikan pelan industri, the new industrial master plan. For those of you who might have heard about Mariana Mazzucato, so this time around, in the 4th version of the new industrial master plan, Malaysia took an approach that is mission-based. I mention this because 2018 was the first phase, so usually the same gang was working on it. And of course the government fell, and the same gang, partly about 80% of them, reconstituted under YB Chintong for it to be completed. But it takes a mission-based approach. Maksudnya kita ni ada satu misi. You might be different ministries, you might be doing different specialization, but we are all working for this particular mission. So then we have to identify what are the key sectors. Because Malaysia too dependent on oil and gas. Right? I mean, it is the reality. Kita kalau lihat, this could be controversial, but again, I hope you bear with me for the sake of discussion and thought-provoking questions. Why is it the biggest company in Malaysia in terms of value is a gambling company? Okay? Why is it that most of our GLCs are predominantly involved from the 1970s, which is the year where foreign ownership is at its zenith? This is based on James Putucherry's book, and his series of articles in No Cowardly Past. Kenapa? Memang kebanyakannya dalam bidang pembinaan, contohnya. Of course, we have Petronas, but the issue is that GLCs, right, they're not really providing much in terms of manufacturing. So these are important questions that link to industrialization. If you don't deal with that, ladies and gentlemen, dah berapa percubaan untuk mereformasikan GLC, and I refer zaman Tan Sri Azman Mokhtar, 04. That was the first one. Then you go through different iterations, and I believe in institutional memory. So when you want to do certain things, jangan lupa usaha lampau. It doesn't matter which Prime Minister. Usaha lampau, you're going to respect the efforts by the different stakeholders, right? But the industrialization portion, so for me, that needs tweaking in order to address the brain drain. And of course, at the end of the day, as I said to many persons, it's funny, I just met Carl Lu. I don't know if you know Service Hero. Have you heard the company? So I met him in Oxford, and I forced him to come back. No, I didn't force lah. I just said, baliklah Malaysia, kita kena bantu semua, whatever. And he did. He did come back. He's like, okay, the pandemic didn't help. But, I mean, he's now in iPrice. Who knows iPrice? Bro, it's like the third after Lazada and Shopee.
Oh, thank God.
Okay, right, guys. And Bukalapak. Indonesia punya biggest SME punya. Okay, Alhamdulillah. Yeah, thanks for politely answering, even though I'm not sure you know or not. Tapi the issue is, that's why for me, we need to do it together lah, in a sense, because dia memang ada banyak faktor, but I think most importantly, we do need to make sure that everyone, based on talent, not based on creed, is welcome. There's a lot of, this feeling. I come from Permatang Pao, the seat I represented, I lost the seat. And I know, kat seberang perai ramai rasa, kalau I tak boleh bercakap bahasa Mandarin, kalau I tak boleh bercakap bahasa Inggeris dengan baik, memang tak dapat kerja lah. Yes, similarly, of course, in some other sectors, they will be, advertising it and alienates the non-Malays. So these are the certain policies, kan, we have to be mindful of. Why? Because it really results in us losing out big time. So for me, industrialization is one of the key the hallmarks of ekonomi madani that is being introduced to manage this. But I think we also need to plug in from the educational system I was fortunate enough to meet with, and I end with this point, and it's a bit long, but if you guys have heard about Teach for Malaysia, Leap Ed, jadi Alhamdulillah, they formed the group of CSOs. Most of them in Teach for Malaysia are overseas graduates. They actually come to serve the schools in Malaysia, and they have about retention rate that is absorbed in the Ministry of Education of 30%. But we're trying to push further that we want to expand to more schools. Ya, kenapa? Because pada saya, it's a whole of society approach. Sekarang ni, lepas pandemic, for example, every parent's concerned about education, right? You're concerned about your siblings. You're concerned about those who have reading losses. You're concerned about making sure that the curriculum is relevant. So you cannot expect, for example, the current MOE stakeholders who are already burdened would be able to do it on their own. It's about 10,000 schools in total. Jadi kita nak pastikan ada penglibatan CSOs, ya, yang memang akan diterapkan. So it's a bit of a longer debate, but for me, that including the industrial master plan yang memaksa juga all our GLCs to also keep current. How can you do things differently to meet tomorrow's challenges and technological expectations? Ini memang bukan mudah. So for me, maybe you should tell me as well. Yeah. What do you think will make you come back? Kan? Kan? Maybe they can tell me as well if they want. Yeah.
Kita pun akan beralih kepada to that section as well.
So keep that. Tell me. Kan? Nak.
Okay, just a suggestion kalau nak baca mengenai The Lost Generation, buku daripada Dr. Mazli Malik. It's the best as for now yang I pernah baca.
Okay, nice.
It's about the lost generation regarding the pandemic ticks. So, without further ado, we're gonna open this session to the floor so then you can ask your questions. We are happy if anyone would raise your hand and we'll pass the mic to you.
Can. I mean, it's not mine, but...
Alright, we have one here.
Okay, nak kumpul ke macam mana? Okay, kumpul soalan lah.
Nak kumpul ke atau jawab?
Boleh kumpul 3?
Kumpul 3, alright.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh.
Greetings to all. Actually, I have a simple question regarding the first question about matchmaking in terms of skill and job. So you were talking about GPA scholars, right? But I was wondering, what about the incentive for other government scholars, like non-government scholars?
I see. Private sector, sponsored lah.
So, if this pension reform is happening in a drastic way, how do you compensate with the loss of people who really need to work to become civil servants because they don't have any other skill to enter private sectors? That is my question. Thank you very much.
Maybe I should answer first because I think there's a confusion. So thank you. I didn't get your name. Faik. Thanks, Faik. I think memang ada a sedikit kekeliruan because it's not going to be continued. If I read the statements correctly, and I could, there could be additions later because our recommendation is not really touching on this particular subject matter. So there's a caveat there. But the issue is the new entrants. Because as is, the burden under QAP would be too big to manage or to service. There's a particular year to this, and I think it's really important to kind of have a white paper. Contohnya, there were some civil servants that told us, you can have a white paper, can discuss in Parliament, so at least every member of Parliament, including the parties, because they have all seen it. All the political parties, right? So it should be a depoliticized matter. And we have a healthy discussion about what's going to happen. So to manage the debt and the ballooning explosion, then the new entrants who will still be with the civil servants will be adopted under KWSP with spelled out incentives and so on and so forth. And this would include politicians because before I think 4 governments ago, if you were first-term MP, you don't get pension. You need to win 3 terms. Only then your pension is given to you. Because winning once could be considered a fluke. in different, of course, kind of perceptions. Political secretaries. You didn't get any pensions before, brother. But after the change, then of course they got pensions. So even though as a quantum from the whole, it is not huge, it's the principle of it. So I think it's a good chance to address, as you have newer entrants, right? That everyone is joining this pool, including the issue of doctors. Yeah, but the point is, it's not saying that we're not going to take any more, or the government's not going to take any more. The issue is whether the government can afford, and you want to be able to pay them. What happens when the money completely runs out lah? So this is the issue, and of course, we can take into account kenapa ambil guna duit kuap dulu, banyaklah isu-isu lain yang memang I think it's good to discuss in Parliament. And I feel awal-awal kena cakap, you all tak boleh mempolitikkan kerana semua dah pernah jadi kerajaan. Semua dah tahu dah hutang macam mana. Jadi sila sama-sama kita selesaikan. Contohnya lah. Jadi kita mula dengan ayat tu supaya kita semua duduk diam kan. Tengok the numbers and figure out the best way forward. And of course, I think saya baru nak rujuk perkataan dia panggil post-truth bawah Oxford English Dictionary. I think the most famous word of 2018, post-truth. Yeah, Prof? It means that people are far more, I think, easily swayed, public opinion, to emotions rather than facts. But the good news is, in the Journal of Political Behaviour, people will always be swayed by truth if you can connect and empathize with how they feel and their level of insecurity. So I think the issue is, it's not really clearly made, right? Suddenly it came out. So I think that is the problem, and we need to really tackle it supaya orang faham apakah implikasi dan sama-sama cari penyelesaian. And it cannot just be, okay, I adopt you in KWSP. I feel that it should also include in terms of the educational and career mobility within JPA itself. So maybe for those in PTD already know this more. I mean, yang grade 48, grade 52, 54. So it's not just about going up in terms of time-based manner. It's actually other types of incentives and how you can at least unleash your smarts in the right ministry.
Alright, wonderful. Harap Faik, you got your answer.
I'll try to find the statements later. Give you much.
And the next question. Yes, we have one over there. Alright.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Salam katu.
Okay, saya ada dua soalan. Satu berkaitan keselamatan makanan. Dan yang kedua berkaitan dengan falsafah politik Malaysia. Berkenaan dengan security makanan, saya nak tahu lebih lanjut macam mana, apakah potensi dan kemampuan dan keupayaan AI dalam kita cuba mereformasikan AI dalam kita cuba mereformasikan semula industri pertanian negara, dan apakah sebenarnya langkah yang patut untuk kita ambil segera dan serius supaya kita tidak lagi dibebani dengan keadaan di mana kita perlu bergantung dengan negara lain untuk membekalkan sumber makanan-makanan asas utama negara, supaya kita dapat membina suatu masa depan yang lebih mandiri untuk sistem makanan kita. Itu yang pertama, dua soalan pertama berkaitan sekuriti makanan. Dan yang kedua adalah, ini yang mungkin ada serba tentang falsafah politik Malaysia. Macam mana kita nak mengajak masyarakat kita berbincang soal perkara-perkara, sebab I resonate when you say about we need to drive our discussion more towards a policy-based discussion. Bagaimana kita nak mengajak, apakah reformasi yang boleh kita laksanakan dalam parlimen kita atau apa-apa sistem politik kita, supaya kita boleh mengajak ke semua orang dalam politik untuk berbincang masalah yang lebih pokok dan lebih penting dalam sistem pentadbiran. Sebab realitinya, di kedua-dua pihak, kita berada dalam satu dunia yang we have no better choice. It's almost about making a choice between two lesser evils. How we want to make sure that we can say there is actually a fruitful discussion having in the parliament itself, rather than having a world where the juxtaposition is choosing between two less evil.
Alright, thank you. I didn't get your name.
Akmal.
Akmal.
Ya. Okey, kerana soalan-soalan sangat-sangat panjang, so, jawapan dia saya jawab satu persatu. Kalau dulu nak rangkum, saya mula dengan keselamatan makanan. isu ini memang pada saya sangat penting, tapi AI tu hanyalah pendapat saya lah. Kalau lihat pada laporan-laporan utama dan kajian, dia bergantung kepada pasaran dan kebolehan untuk menghasilkan sumber makanan tersebut terlebih dahulu. So if you can't produce, then you can't really talk about AI per se, right? So saya boleh rujuk laporan yang Dr. Sarina Umar dari Khazanah Research Institute. She prepared a report not just on paddy. Mereka juga telah melakukan satu survey melibatkan beberapa ribu non-paddy smallholders. Jadi di Malaysia ini ada ramai Sabah, Sarawak dan disebut Projek Semai. So if you Google Semai and the KRI, they did that work. Two of the ones who did it under my team, Zairin from Think City and the other one is Atika from Khazanah. Dan penting kerana Projek Semai suara daripada petani yang bukan terlibat dalam sektor padi. Jadi mereka sebutlah contohnya extreme climate change. Hari ini patutnya kat London lagi sejuk kan, kata orang lah. Tapi kerana climate change, of course you have increasing temperatures, very uneven. Kalau di Malaysia, apa kesan dia? Hasil tanaman kurang menjadi. Ramai yang kata, kita buat tanaman mengikut kiranya bawah greenhouse, ya. Dan semua inisiatif ini penting, tapi dia masih lagi terhad. Kerana apa? Kerana kita ada sistem tradisional yang sangat melebar dan luas. Bawah Felda, ya, bawah Velcra, Rizda pun, walaupun tanaman getah kita sebenarnya dah kalah dengan Vietnam. Tapi kita masih lagi berbelanja beratus juta untuk membayar semua yang bekerja dalam Rizda. That's why reform is important. Bukan kita buang kerja, tidak. Dia keluar headline pada kan. Cadangan kami adalah untuk push them towards food crops. Because boleh makan padi tak saudara-saudari? Tak boleh kan? And to produce latex, the amount of money you put in, dia tidak menguntungkan untuk penoreh getah. Demi proses tu, kan, mungkin latex tu diperlukan, tapi untuk dia menunggu the man hours, it doesn't make sense for him or her. Jadi kita ambil kira semua ini adalah cadangan tertentu, tetapi saya nak sebut berbalik kepada first listening to the smallholders. Mereka perlukan, ya, dari segi lebih banyak lagi latih tubi, kerana mereka yang menerima bantuan latih tubi, upskilling will always end up better off. The main suggestions that Dr. Serna is saying in terms of food import, you're talking about food has to be available, all right? So when you talk about your food secure, it's not so much you're exporting everything. It's not about you're able to be sustaining everything, the production. It is about your ability to make sure food is available on the table for the people at any given moment. And this can be done with a mixture of not depending only on one country to supply you. It's a mixed bag. So you can't be planting everything. How much land do we have? It is not doable. So the thing is, she says it has to be a mixed bag. That's her reports. I recommend we reading it because it's very well done. She even went to the issue of rice. Now, how many of you have tried barrio rice? It is extremely superior. It's superior. It's very, very delicious. Then barrio rice, believe it or not, you need a permit to cross states. You need a permit to cross states. So one of her suggestions is please remove the permit untuk cross Kedah ke Johor ke, because we should at least be able to transfer the rice, the different variety to each other. So there are a few suggestions for reforms, but for me, that's a small part, right? Tapi bila kita kembali ke atas, masalahnya we did become very big. So when you're very big, you have to think about cost-cutting measures. Because you kena ingat dari segi skala ladang, not about a smallholder perspective. Right, so Joe Studwell writes about this, comparison of many countries, how Asia works. The different countries, whether Malaysia, Jepun, Taiwan, tak silap saya, China, to look at what are the produce yang impactful. So for me, agriculture and food security is not going to be an easy matter. I would definitely start with the small steps first. So even when we talk about recommending for the more AI powered permatang power, we had a company, Kairos, from Sarawak. They produce vanilla. So the days of Madagascar is over. We want permatang power to but it's vanilla. But vanilla how many years? 5 years, bro. 5 years baru nak keluar dia punya benih dia. Jadi tapi they managed to reduce to 3 years. So now second year, 1 more year. 1 more year. But the point is, at least the Penang state government had allowed them to continue this effort. But it's extremely high investment. But my point is, at least we have all the small pockets. But is it going to go far in providing food security? Of course not. But it helps us to have a mix, kind of export and different produce. But so for me, let's start with their suggestions. And from the AI could power the more unique sets of food produce. Okay, the second question in terms of how do you make sure orang lebih berminat, people are more interested in the key issues. Honestly, if I can say this, people want to hear things that matter to them, but sometimes if you speak in academic language, they really don't have the time to listen to you, right? Because they have other problems. And I think one of the things I commend is KPDN's decision. KPDN came up with Rahmah, of course. Tapi arwah Datuk Salahuddin, Masya Allah. But they also commissioned Ipsos to do a study on impact ataupun mendengar suara pengguna subsidi minyak. Termasuk pemandu e-hailing. So sometimes we talk about, rationalize subsidies. We have to make sure oil is unproductive. We have to remove it. Yes, of course. But it's, at least you hear how much fuel do you consume when you have to be an e-hailer driver. How dependent you are and how much lesser your profit margin will be once the subsidies are removed. And what kind of mechanics that government can utilize to supplant your loss of income, right? And then you contrast it with Gojek, with even e-hailing companies, Grab in Singapore, and you realize, you see a better picture. What's the picture? E-hailing companies not just are precarious for the workers, they are not making enough money. Why? How can you make money when you take percentage from someone who's not getting enough to make ends meet? Isn't it a dying model? So that's why in Singapore, they cap the surge prices. If I'm not mistaken, it's 150%. I have to recheck again later. And they also make sure you can only cut a certain percentage when you buy food from the merchant. And then Gojek, of course, I think they have decided it's a risk to the economy. So these are the factors yang kita kena ambil kira, right? Because then they issue reskilling, making sure they are able to find better jobs and to provide social security net, insurance when they're working. Because right now, the companies are not forced to provide insurance. They are depending on, of course, Perkeso. Perkeso, who funds Perkeso? Government. Jadi, government then has to pay because setiap hari you get pay. Macam hari ni mungkin I get RM20, maybe RM100 if I'm lucky. Then I have to come up with that money to protect myself while I'm working. Obviously, you're going to think 2-3 times, right? So these are the trends that I feel, how do we explain better to them? That's our challenge. And in Parliament, I feel, in my humble opinion, kalau ada white paper, and this I got from civil servants. Maksudnya, JPA paper memang dah ada the study, reveal it. Of course, if you want to take selected portions, fine. And then showcase what year it was done, so you know it crosses the different federal governments. And then let's discuss this in a way that's to secure the results, inshallah. But it's an effort. Like for me, I don't know how to get on TikTok. I mean, it's very hard. I don't like it. So as a Generasi X and proud of it, I feel like I'm not heard, right? What's wrong with Instagram? But that's our challenge. So I'm trying to figure out how do I get access, because the 18-year-olds, including my daughter, watches TikTok. And they do use this medium in order to vote. You can judge whatever you want, but it is the reality. So macam mana kita nak pastikan perbahasan kat parlimen tu is immediately accessed in language that is done, and it's very, very challenging. I'm no disrespect to boomers. I mean, even for me pun, but it is something that we have to embrace. Like, it's not just saying you got to listen. No, we also need to talk and communicate in a way that people can resonate and understand.
Thank you so much, and thank you Akmal for the questions. Boleh kata the topics you mentioned, usually it is not too sexy. That's why it is not well addressed in Malaysia or even our media. So maybe we can get like more questions. Yes. Yeah, you can.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Faiza, for the enlightening talk and also a question and answer. My name is Nadia Monira. I'm a career civil servant, GPA scholar, doing PhD in Innovation and Public Policy at Mariana Mazzucato's department.
Oh, so nice! Can we talk of this?
So yeah,
So nice.
my PhD is on innovation, looking at digital government specifically. Bermula starting di lemah pantai sebelum ni, tapi ada keluarga juga di Perantau Bawah. So I have two questions to raise, or two issues to probably discuss and springboard with you. The first is when you talk about public sector. You mentioned about the term that saya yang menurut perintah now is being changed, also saya menjalankan amanah, because I think in a way, if you follow Mariana Mazzucato's philosophy, she advocates that state-led growth or innovation should start from the public sector, from the government. Meaning to say, we need to have the brightest,
Yes, absolutely.
and driven public servants, right, in the government. But when we discuss, or you mentioned about reforms, and the issue of pensions that you also highlighted just now, I see there are two trade-offs. For instance, like if I say we need good people, or we remove pension, how do we actually attract or get more bright and talented, skilled human beings to join the public sector? Because as you said, not everyone goes into the public sector for the pension or the privileges. But sometimes it's like, by the way, oh, okay, I have this. But how do we actually have this particular platform to contribute? That is number one. Where I actually look at, we also need to look at how do we encourage talent mobility between the public and private sector. If it's harder to actually join the public sector at this point of time, because I think the collaboration or the collaborative effort actually spur innovation. That is one of the idea that I've been thinking about in my PhD. Second one is, as you say, if let's say government operation expenditure create a lot of fiscal pressure or coffers that is too hard to sustain in the long run, I do think that the government also has looked into right sizing of the public servant or the public sector size, because we are not talking about not getting the right people, but also we have to rationalize what do we actually want from our public sector.
That's the one, yeah.
And how do we actually rationalize the right post to the right people, like the job matching that you mentioned. So I think that these two areas need to be looked at, as I do believe and I do have faith. We have really good and talented people in the public sector, but also we need collaboration and more diversity in terms of talent, skills and brain. And the second one, as you said, about the pension, I do think that it's a very huge political will to do it. So I applaud the current government, but it has to
Kena betul-betul.
It has to also have coping mechanism to ensure that we get the best people in the public sector.
Alright, thank you so much for the questions.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Nadia Munira. You know, I'm so happy because I think when I was in PAC, when we were questioning some of the scandal-ridden issues, I in fact wanted so much for the civil servants to have that ability to empower within them, because it's actually them who decide on whether the system is needed or not, and a lot of the wastages take place on software in terms of the tenders that really left us vulnerable to a lot of wastage. And maybe going back to the issue of talent mobility between private and public sector, I think there was previously ongoing programs, MOF itself, in my short stint that I was there, before I left for ACFIN. They had PNB staffer, some from Bank Negara. And so when we set up the team, I don't know if you guys have seen the new data.gov.my, Mampu punya upgraded website. That was done by a team of Bank Negara and civil servants and those who were headhunted, local graduates, coders. So please take a look, because that came as a desire to empower internally. And when I mentioned the government announcement that they wanted to have this new adoption of new entrants into KWSP, it is not without incentives. They would have to announce the incentives that actually help lure a lot of them. If you look at the database under QOP, this was done when Datuk Sri Dr. Wan Azizah was Deputy Prime Minister. That was the first study. And you saw ramai yang ada masalah kesihatan di akhir lanjut umur dan simpanan yang tidak mencukupi. So that in terms of statistik melihat kepada kaki tangan kerajaan dan keperluan mereka. So issues of pension fund is very important to make sure you retire comfortably, retire healthily. I think that's what you want to make sure is inputted even as the transition takes place in KWSP. So I completely agree, because you have to make it lucrative, you have to attract the best minds. And right now the government introduced monitoring implementation. Because one thing is announcement. If everyone knows a budget dia macam satu pergerakan kura-kura sebelum dia boleh implement. So I think that's why the days, I don't know, you know about pemandu before, it was all mostly from the outside sector. So right now the attempt is trying to have majority of those in Pantau Madani and Pacu under KSN are the civil servants. Yeah, so it's meant to see across the different ministries pelaksanaan. Apa yang tadi umum dilaksanakan di setiap peringkat, and what are the stumbling blocks. So it's still new, but I think absolutely on point. I believe when you go back, you have to share this insight, because JPA will be the one that will be deciding on the talent placement. That's what I mean by reforms as well. Not necessarily, yes, incentives for sure. Everyone kena ada ada ruang lah, where even as you move to the new KWSP proposal, you need to give something that is meaningful for them. But it's also about internal placement. I think that in itself is a reform that requires JPA to be a talent management department that is superior in all aspects. So yeah, that would be my input, and I think when you talk about right sizing, that's what it means lah. Making sure the right people for the right department. Last point, Kementerian Wanita. Kementerian Wanita is so important. They have to carry the bulk of welfare assistance in the country. They don't have enough social workers. They're struggling. So they say after the pandemic, kita sebenarnya perlu lebih ramai lagi pekerja sosial, kan? Tapi tak cukup duit, because duit is cukup untuk pemberian saja. So you need to also allow sama ada untuk manage the child commissioners ataupun to manage the social workers, penjawatan tu, senarai penjawatan itu diberikan bagi menempatkan lebih banyak lagi kebolehan counselling or assistance when crisis hits or children who are traumatized need help. Thank you. So don't forget, you must share your insights.
Thank you so much. But is it possible if we
Okay.
we allow
Boleh.
we should, if you want to ask question, yes.
Kartel.
Interesting. Firstly, Nurul, thank you very much for taking the time to come and address all of us here this evening. I know you arrived this morning, must be requiring a lot of stamina. I salute people leaders like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to address the issue of brain drain, which there was some questions asked about brain drain. Now, I'm a product of talent corp. I went back to Malaysia to work as a captain with Malaysia Mass Wings, based in Sabah. And at that time, I think that program now is discontinued, the talent corp.
Ada lagi tau.
Yeah, I don't think they have got a program, but there were some weaknesses in the program, and I don't want to bore everybody with all the details.
No, I mean,
but one of the weaknesses was when you go back on the talent corp like I had, we have the privilege of the first 5 years we pay income tax capped at 15% to make it attractive for students like you who go back to work in Malaysia, which I thought was a bit unfair because my colleagues who fly as captains with me, they are paying higher tax and I pay lower tax. I mean, that's not fair because they say you went overseas, you went to cari makan overseas and you became a masaleh bandar hitam and you come back now and working in Malaysia, back in Malaysia and getting
that's partial.
So which I agree, so there was some weaknesses to address.
Okay.
Now, I want to address the government has a lot of difficulty trying to attract overseas Malaysians to come back because salaries comparison wise, is very difficult, and with the government going through a financial crisis, it can be tough. But I want to think outside the box and make a suggestion for the government. During my time, because we are the older generation, the Americans had a program called American Peace Corps. Send people overseas to countries, developing countries, to provide expertise.
I can promote
as
my corps.
teachers, experts in engineering and whatnot, all the various other fields. I would like to propose the Malaysian government start a Malaysian Peace Corps system where we invite, there's numerous Malaysians, because I'm a pilot, I travel all over the world. There are lots of Malaysians living overseas who have retired, who get good pensions overseas. They're happy to come back to help Malaysia. They don't expect any salaries or anything. You just provide them accommodation and maybe a cost of living, and they will come back. So I know talk is cheap, I like to volunteer to help, to recruit all these people to come back to Malaysia. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's actually
Okay, that's great. Actually, I'm just gonna add on. Well, the other bit is the spouse, when they come back under talent corp, they can't work, right?
Sorry?
When the spouse returns with you, can the spouse work?
No, the spouse can't work, and if your spouse is a foreigner, the Malaysian government will speed track and give them permanent residence.
Oh,
That was one of the
that's a lot.
Benefit. And then you can bring back 2 cars or duty free and all that kind of thing, which I thought was a little bit over the top.
Okay.
Although I benefited.
Thank you for your sincere response. I think a huge round of applause because he was sincerely not wanting the Malaysian government to lose money.
Because when you work overseas, you've already made your money, so you don't need to take a lot more money from Malaysia. So I sympathize with my colleagues who.
So what would it take for you to just come back then? What was the bare minimum?
There were certain criteria that you have to meet. One of which depends on from which country. Like if you are an expat working in Singapore, you cannot go on the talent corp. Yeah, so there's a lot of discrimination. Like
I see.
Friends of mine who worked in Singapore or who worked in Korea, they were not considered. Only if you work in the Western world, then yes.
Korea pun tak ambil dekat.
So
Okay,
there's a lot
yeah.
don't forget, Malaysia has now
Yes.
become a net exporter of pilots. A lot of Malaysian pilots are working overseas. Unlike before, where you get all the Matsalehs coming to work in Malaysia, now it's the other way around. We export pilots.
Yeah.
So that's
Okay. Thanks. We got to really look through this. I just want to add on that there's actually Malaysia My Call.
Yeah.
So My Call, in fact, YB Hanayo was trying to promote not just my core, but Satria. So Satria is a humanitarian training for domestic purposes, for youth lah, specific for youth. If I understand what you're talking about, perhaps want to make it larger in scope for those who are professionally trained. But my core, I've actually met some of them working in Bangladesh on humanitarian work. It is extremely impressive what they do. So in the light of the genocide in Gaza, we are asking that before, to basically ask for volunteers to be trained so that you know how to manage in a particular war zone. Of course, when it's peacetime, or at least when the ceasefire has been enacted, but what you can do to be and remain helpful. So, I think what you're trying to share is a more like for them to teach overseas, etc.
Because I'm a very strong believer, Nurul, that Malaysia's education system has to be revamped. It is so important. To be number one in the world, you have to have a good education system.
Yep.
And I will do whatever it takes in terms of volunteering to help to upgrade Malaysian standards. And this Peace Corps route with all the retirees, because I'm a retiree, so I can help to recruit.
So do you want to enlarge that?
Bring them all back to Malaysia. A lot of them are happy to come back, because Malaysia is a good place to jolly, It's a fact.
Okay.
So they're happy, they've got no more responsibility.
Also, we can have zikir and salawat.
And they've got pensions overseas, so they're all happy to come back. You don't need to spend a lot of money. So I'm willing to volunteer if you want to use me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So comel.
Thank you so much. So maybe we can proceed for one more question. That we have. Can you please pass the mic? All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Zizi and I'm an art history and literature student.
Nice.
Yeah, so I like that you mentioned that the direction of for the reform that the government is currently taking is to focus on the humanity. But I don't think we can...
my view lah, my personal view lah. I cannot. Government.
I think we need a bit of more from the lens of the humanities when it comes to the reform. But when I think about just like modernizing Malaysia, I also think about like the development of the art scene. Because like so far, like the art scene in Malaysia has a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it also has to do with like the perception that a lot of Malaysians has towards arts education. And I don't mean art as in like painting art, but art with as. So it's just like arts. And we always held like just like STEM education to such a high regard that like STEM is for the smart kids, and if you're any dumber, you go into the arts. But that's obviously not true. And so so I think my question is that, do you know if there are any steps being taken by the current government to maybe advance the development of the art scene in Malaysia?
Yeah. Well,
thank you so much for the question. A very interesting one.
Yeah, because my younger sister Zizi is she did graphic design, and now she's doing her master's in New York, specifically on arts and activism. So basically, you know how people utilize arts in order to advocate a particular issue, and I think with regards to what's happening, you know, the more creative content, it really allows us to express ourselves in the best way possible and also win new supporters, right? I would say right now there is a fragmented system whereby, yes, there is that focus on STEM, predominantly to manage the needs of the thirst of companies that are coming in to invest in Malaysia. We have made wonders the first 6 months, basically being one of the top destinations for FDI, but a lot of them want engineers. So even in Penang, there's a huge shortage. And I'm a firm believer, because we as Ontarians, we took English literature even though we're engineers. So, you know, we believe like arts and philosophy, history, it really colors your life, right? And understanding history helps you form plans for the present and a better future. So when you talk about arts with an S at the back, I completely agree that in terms of the educational part, it has to provide for a more holistic approach. But also, whether the jobs, like my own sister, it's very hard for her to get a job. in terms of what her priority or her field is. She managed to intern in one of the top Black Lives Matter publications in New York. So even as an intern, you get your design to be published. But it's just harder, I guess, to have that. So I think that's an evolving discussion. YB Fahmi Fadzil, of course, through Finas, has tried to make sure, at least in the movie scene, it's further kind of expanded. But I think we need to hear more from the Ministry of Tourism because it's arts and culture as well. So I went to visit Suryani Senja Alias, and during the exhibition there was a collection of many artists exhibiting activism, criticism through their artwork. But again, how do we plug this in? I think we need to provide for more. So I'll get back to you in terms of, because they did publish a few, this is with regards to the culinary arts. So there was quite an active movement with the embassy, if I'm not mistaken, as well as the Ministry of Tourism. But yes, I believe we need a clear-cut vision where Malaysia and its art scene can be in the next 5 to 10 years, right? Because having that vision, even in the Madani framework, is very important. I have to say that please remember you are valued. Please remember that the fact that you've chosen this vocation, and I see it in Hana's eyes, even when a lot of people in Malaysia might not have understood her collage in Papaku Sayang. She published it where she gouged the eyes of a certain former Prime Minister, not because of violence, because it is a way for her to kind of unleash her inner demons as a 6-year-old facing different challenges. And I think it's a good way to show that, kita gunakan, semua kreativiti kita untuk menzahirkan beberapa trauma ataupun cabaran yang kita hadapi. Jadi konsep itu pun saya nampak kadang-kadang mencabar. Because orang tanya, kenapa buat macam tu? Astaghfirullahalazim. Yeah, of course, we don't mean it literally. It's just a depiction of, picture in time. Sometimes you're blinded by what you've done, and so on and so forth. So, yes, Suzy, we look forward to your input as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Ministry of Tourism, kalau boleh iklankan. Kan?
You have the mic with you. Alright, great.
You nak jawab tak?
Nak jawab.
Salam sejahtera. Ya, saya. Yeah.
My question to you is that since you mentioned about brain drain and lack of highly skilled jobs in Malaysia, so in Malaysian universities we are not very updated with STEM-based wages. So how can you ensure that the higher education ministries or Malaysia in general can ensure Malaysian universities STEM-based subjects are on par with the global demand?
Thank you. Boleh? Boleh. Thank you. I didn't catch your name. Anissa. So Anissa, basically when Khalid Nordin was the minister, this is previous to Datuk Sri Zamri, so we had an engagement because he created a task force to track the curriculum that graduates go through and how it impacted them. It was done over 3 months. The chair was Idris Jala, who was based, Datuk Sri Idris Jala, who was based in Sunway at the time. And then they had PwC, EY, if I'm not mistaken, I could get that consultant wrong. And the third one was BCG. So basically, they knew this was a happening. And part of the reason is because sometimes when you have the courses, it's not necessarily reflective of what industry wants. So, sometimes it's also important then to build on that particular industry in Malaysia itself. Because you could be producing, for example, graduates that could be perfect for the Singapore scene, right? But then you lose out domestically. Now, the other bit as well, Malaysia, 25% to 30% are tertiary educated. So the rest are below tertiary levels. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Germany is the same. Germany is 70-30, if I'm not mistaken. Majority are in technical and vocational institutions. And the other one is Japan. So Japan's rates are behind South Korea. South Korea, as you know, 90% top notch, but suicide rates also very pressure lah, very pressure. But it's still great. I still look up to South Korea, and the Kazanah Megatrends Forum We'll be inviting a South Korean economist this year, so please look forward to that. But my point is, it's not necessarily always bad. But then how then does your TVET, which is a mainstay in Economy Madani, how can your TVET programs be completely in sync with what the industry wants? So I think BCG is trying to make that matching, whereby the programs that they did in Singapore, so basically they do a grooming program and they immediately match it with the industry or the company. So immediately you get a job. So that's part and parcel of the things that they're recommending. And I think the other bits will have to be matching exact schools within the vicinity of a particular company. In Batu Kawan, there's a particular company that has a teaching factory. So everything's equipped, ready, right? Petronas does this superbly because Petronas has an ecosystem that can allow you to have mobility after going through or finishing school. Now, in the teaching factory, they target sekolah menengah nearby. And not all students want to go and pursue their degree. And it's fine, as long as they want to study. Because you do need technicians. And during the pandemic, you do need different people who are skillful. And they should rightly also enjoy mobility 5 years later. And that's why being, for example, in the gig economy, an e-hailer driver is bad. Because lepas 5 tahun, berapa gaji you? And can you drive as good as you can when, you know, it's long hours, it's precarious. So I think the TVET scene is something that we're trying to maximize. And we believe that also dependent on making sure that industry ascertains and chooses. So a lot of the matching is taking place. I think they've given it to one of the deputy prime ministers to chair. But again, the results of the tracker study from Datuk Seri Khalid Nordin is going to be utilized by the Sri Zamri. So I'm going to follow up because one of the reasons why I'm here as well, I believe in, so we're working on a Center for Affordable Diagnostics and Therapeutics. We talk about cancer, I'm sure, Doc, you know more. Cancer treatment is very expensive. So sometimes we have to also make sure Malaysia works and finds out its way. We were very successful with drugs for neglected diseases in producing medication for Hep C. Okay, Malaysia did it. For those of you who have time, please Google DNDI, drugs for neglected diseases, Hep C. You know, so it's a global South-South collaboration. So I think we should do more in this regard. But my point is, we then can produce an ecosystem of sorts. But the point is, we must make sure that workers are also part of this solution. Similarly, FDI. Japan is one of the toughest countries. Dia Zahrin, dia akan paksa, like, you want to give FDI, but what other benefits? Are you going to hire our locals? Are you going to give everything to us? That's Japan when they were demanding stuff from America. So for those of you, you know, chip war gives a small picture of it happening. But like for us, look at Taiwan, super semiconductor brand, right? Like amazing, right? They're just known for that. But we're still not quite there. So of course then we figure out, okay, if FDI is good, but how do we harness the most from these multinationals who sometimes don't hire Malaysians? So these are the things that we can consider as we pick what are the industrialization sectors we want to focus on. So I keep going back to this because it's still about, again, linking it to the graduates that come out from our institutions. And you certainly cannot go on if you have archaic curriculum, right? That, you know, that no one really, like, I'm so happy we have a Mazukato like entrant here. Sorry, but it's a big thing. I keep mentioning at every PAC meeting. So inshallah lah, that's where we should be heading. But yes, I will, if you're interested, I'll try to get a copy. If it's you know, disclosed for you know, or declassified, more than happy to share it with you. Thanks, Anissa.
All right, thank you so much. And I think with Anisa's question, that is the last question for today. And thank you very much for your contribution. I'm very proud of the dynamic of this discussion today.